हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम टू वैल्यू क्वोशंट। इस वीडियो में हम बात करेंगे फेडरल बैंक की। फेडरल बैंक एक मीडियम साइज्ड रीजनल बैंक है जिसकी मार्केट कैपिटलाइजेशन अराउंड 17,000 करोड़ है एज ऑन February 2021। इस वीडियो को हमने, इस एनालिसिस को या इस केस स्टडी को हमने अलग अलग 5 डिफरेंट पार्ट्स में तोड़ा है। फर्स्ट पार्ट इज द हिस्ट्री, वील अंडरस्टैंड द कॉन्टेक्स्ट, किस समय जब बैंक फाउंड हुआ था, क्या सिचुएशन थी बैंकिंग की। इज अ वेरी वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग लुक इनटू दैट पीरियड। फिर सेकेंडली हम एंटी थीसिस पॉइंटर्स, मतलब क्या ऐसी चीजें हैं, क्या प्रॉब्लम्स हैं जो इन्वेस्टिंग कम्युनिटी की तरफ से बैंक के लिए ऐसा देखा जा रहा है इन टर्म्स ऑफ परफॉर्मेंस. So what has been the case in the last 5, 7, 10 years? Thirdly, we look at asset quality in 3 major time frames, to 2016, 18 और 20. हम ये भी समझेंगे क्यों ये periods हमने pick किए. Finally, हम बात करेंगे फेडरल बैंक के टर्न अराउंड पॉइंटर्स. ऐसा कुछ हुआ है कि ये जो एंटी थीसिस पॉइंटर्स हैं उनको इम्प्रूव करने की कोशिश की हो बैंक के मैनेजमेंट ने, तो वो हम देखेंगे. एंड फाइनली डेवलपमेंट्स टू वॉच आउट फॉर कि गोइंग फॉरवर्ड what is the trend, where is the bank going in terms of the business, its strategy. So this will be a very interesting case study analysis, जो भी आप कहना चाहें. तो इसी के साथ शुरू करते हैं. We'll start off with the beginning. So 1931 में Federal Bank was founded. Initially नाम Federal Bank नहीं था. It was called the Travancore Bank. And Travancore is the region जो आज की डेट में जो केरला वाला region है, it was called Travancore at the time. And 1944 में subsequently एक young lawyer ने, who was I think somewhere around 28 to 30 years old, Shri KP Hormis, इन्होंने बैंक को purchase किया with the help of some borrowed funds from his father. And उस समय जो Travancore बैंक था literally fail होने के कगार पे आ गया था. When he took over the bank had one branch. Obviously, जैसे हमने बात की, it was almost failing. And 35 years later, by the time he retired, he had built it into a 285 branch bank. So obviously, it's a great achievement. And आज तक Federal Bank में इनको he has been credited with a lot of the initial growth. Having said that, हमने बात की banks fail होने की. तो इसी टॉपिक पे I was doing my research और मैंने सोचा पता करते हैं कि आजकल हमारे जैसे येस बैंक, पीएमसी बैंक, ऑल दीज इश्यूज आ रहे हैं. तो उस समय 20s, 30s, 40s में बैंकिंग की क्या सिचुएशन थी. तो मेरे सामने कुछ स्टैट्स आए जो मेरे को लगा शेयर करने चाहिए. दे आर वेरी वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग. तो सबसे पहले ये जो लिस्ट है, बाय द वे, आरबीआई इज द सोर्स, एंड एज यू कैन से इंडियन सेंट्रल बैंकिंग इंक्वायरी कमेटी 1930. इसके बारे में हम और थोड़ा आगे बात करेंगे. But we can see that maximum number of banks were in Bengal, 919 banks, and Madras में 116 banks. So these were the 2 regions where most of the banks were located. And the total number of banks is a staggering 1258. मतलब 1250 banks थे total at the time in existence. अब इसके कई reason हैं. One of them was there was no regulation. Banks at the time were not being treated as special institutions. मतलब उनके लिए अलग से regulation जो है वो develop नहीं हुआ था. In fact, RBI itself was formed in 1935. तो उससे पहले और इस दौरान क्या situation थी, it was very very interesting. अभी I also came across a list of the banks that were failing, जिसकी speed अगर आप देखेंगे तो आपको बड़ा interesting लगेगा. So let me just do that and move my camera. So here we can see that. So sorry, one second. Right. So by the way, this red outline is basically the column where the banks have failed. So 1926 and 1935, every year, a large number of banks were failing. 14, 15, 13, 11, 24, 25, and it was increasing as you go. Now, I thought it was very interesting कि आज हमें एक yes bank, naturally yes bank is a much larger bank and much larger impact. But if you look at banking from a zoomed out perspective, in a lot of ways things have improved. Imagine कीजिए इस time पे छोटे banks थे, and if your savings were there in the bank, went bust, you couldn't really do anything. And because banks weren't regulated, जो हम आगे और समझेंगे कि why these banks were failing, they weren't regulated was one reason. उसकी वजह से a lot of issues were being caused in the banking system and therefore in the economy. अगर हम 1935 से अगर देखें, so 1935 to 1945, even more banks, more number of banks were failing. 1939 में 117 ऐसे बैंक्स थे जो फेल हुए, 1940 में 107, एंड इस कुछ ईरा में एक बैंक था ट्रैवनकोर बैंक, which was subsequently taken over by Shri KP Hormis जी, जैसे हमने बात की 1944 में. And 1947 to 1955, more banks are failing. So if you look at this picture right in front of you, 1926 to 1956, 20 years mein, I mean, I haven't counted the exact number, but banks were failing left, right, center. So question ये उठता है कि why was this happening? And इसी चीज को पता करने के लिए, इस क्वेश्चन का आंसर ढूंढने के लिए एक इंडियन सेंट्रल बैंकिंग इंक्वायरी कमेटी बिठाई गई, and this was around 1929 में, if I'm not wrong. And this committee was made up of 21 members, and when I was reading it, it said that most of them were Indians. So maybe he was trying to project that there was impartiality and all that. But anyway, इस committee के basis पे, what the committee found out was there were a couple of reasons why banks were failing in such large numbers at the time. One of the reasons की regulation नहीं था, so there was no RBI. RBI was founded in 1935. So regulation नहीं था. Secondly, there was no concept of capital buffers. आज की डेट में जैसे शायद आप जानते होंगे कि there is an SLR and CRR, statutory lending ratio and cash reserve ratio. And the purpose of these ratios is to maintain a certain buffer with the RBI. So ये जो amount है, not all of it, but part of that amount is kept with the RBI so that in any case if there is an issue with the bank or ऐसे ना हो जाए कि bank is completely goes bust. So these are the learnings we have. These are the things we have learned over time, and so that is one change. उस time capital buffer नहीं था, regulation नहीं थी. इस committee को पता, they found that another big reason for failure was naturally poor lending, and that hasn't changed. If you look back in 1920s and if you look back today, I think poor lending, as we saw in the last 10 years on the part of public banks and some private banks, it has been indiscriminate. So the quality of lending has always been an issue. Another reason we are facing today, जो उस time भी था, जो इस committee ने बताया, कि directors का conflict of interest. A lot of times, directors who were people who were directors of these banks, these were generally influential people. And जैसे हमें पता लगा ICICI बैंक के case में there was this, allegedly some money, some kickbacks were given to disburse loans to Videocon industries. हमें पता लगा है कि Yes बैंक के केस में ऐसे कुछ बातें हैं. हमें पता लगा है PMC बैंक जो क्राइसिस हुआ, वहाँ पे डायरेक्टर्स ने अपने known connections, people who are known, उनको loans दिए. So these were some of the reasons that banks were failing at the time. And surprisingly, if you look even today, the reasons have not changed. They are more or less the same reasons. Maybe capital buffer is something that regulatorily speaking has been made better over time. But as far as poor lending is concerned, that practice is still rampant. Conflict of interest has reduced, we would say, from what I know, considerably. And there is higher regulation. So a lot of things have improved also. But as far as poor lending is concerned and, giving loans to directors, that is something that is still a little bit harder to crack for RBI. So having said that, let's move on to the next part. So anyway, coming back to the present time, the last 10-15 years, from one bank to 285 bank branches to today, the bank has nearly, if I'm not wrong, 1,260, 1,258, roughly. Most of the concentration of branches is in Kerala. It had subsequently moved into Tamil Nadu, then other states as you go throughout India. So this is the current situation, and more than 70% of the branches are in semi-urban urban, rural kind of setting. ओके सो अब बात करते हैं कुछ एंटी थीसिस पॉइंटर्स की, क्या कुछ इश्यूज बैंक में देखे गए हैं एटलीस्ट एज फ्रॉम द पर्सपेक्टिव ऑफ द इन्वेस्टर. तो एंटी थीसिस पॉइंटर्स क्या है वो समझते हैं. उसको समझने के लिए यहाँ पे आपके सामने एडवांसेस का एक ग्राफ है. एडवांसेस का सिंपल मीनिंग है टोटल आउटस्टैंडिंग लोन्स, मतलब लोन बुक कितनी है, टोटल अमाउंट ऑफ लोन्स कितने दिए गए. और इसको समझने के लिए मैंने कुछ बैंक्स का कंपैरिजन लिया है. सोर्स ऑफ दिस इज तिजोरी फाइनेंस बाय द वे. वेबसाइट है, आप चेक कर सकते हैं. यू कैन कंपेयर डिफरेंट स्टॉक्स ऑन नंबर ऑफ डिफरेंट पैरामीटर्स. बट सबसे पहला क्वेश्चन इसमें यह आता है कि व्हाई आर वी कंपेयरिंग फेडरल बैंक which is a mid-sized bank with Kotak Mahindra or an HDFC. See, the thing is कि although Federal Bank is in a lot of ways not comparable given its smaller size and reach and all of that, but at the same time as an investor हमें पता होना चाहिए कि what is the benchmark, what is the gold standard that is possible that a bank can achieve. Because as an investor हम कभी भी ये नहीं सोचेंगे कि नहीं मैं सिर्फ एक मिड साइज बैंक में इन्वेस्ट करूंगा या स्मॉल रीजनल बैंक में इन्वेस्ट करूंगा. वी आर लुकिंग टू मैक्सिमाइज आवर इन्वेस्टमेंट. And from that perspective, I thought it's worth comparing it not just with the best banks, which many would say HDFC and Kotak Mahindra would be considered to be the top banks and in a lot of ways are the top banks, but also we should compare with some of the more comparable in terms of size and region, जैसे City Union Bank है और या फिर South Indian Bank है. So let's have a look at that. So we can see that advances, जो total loans दिए गए हैं, वो roughly for Kotak Mahindra over the last 9 years, this is from 2011, has gone up by 650%. HDFC has gone up by 520%. Federal Bank has gone up by 280%. City Union 266%, and South Indian Bank 214. So that is the first thing. But at the same time, if we compare now this loan growth to the net profit growth, there seems to be a little bit of issue because Kotak Mahindra का जो advances growth था और net profit growth है, it is kind of in line. I mean, there is a slight difference, but largely it's in line. Same with HDFC's case. But Federal Bank, जहाँ पे 240% increase, if I'm not wrong, advances में था, total loan book growth में था, वहीं पे जो net profit है, it is 160%. Whereas City Union Bank or South Indian Bank में और भी worse है. Although one has to keep in mind कि March 2020 के जो numbers हैं, they have been depressed because of the COVID-19 lockdown. So net profit numbers can be taken with a grain of salt. But the point is कि जितनी loan book grow हो रही है, उसी proportion में at least Federal Bank का जो net profit है has not grown. Right? To make this point even more clear, I guess what we are trying to say is पहला point ये है, antithesis ये है कि the gap between loan growth, interest income growth and net profit growth is wide, and that too relative in comparison to other banks. जैसे अगर हम करूर वैश्य बैंक का loan growth देखें तो 11.14% है, interest income growth is 11.67% and total income growth is 12%. So it's kind of largely in line. In fact, it's better because total income जो है वो more than the loan growth है. Whereas South Indian Bank को अगर हम देखें तो loan growth is 13.5%, interest income growth is again a slightly higher, and total income growth is even higher. City Union, the same kind of pattern, maybe slightly less in interest income growth and total income growth. But Federal Bank में अगर हम देखें तो there is a difference which is relatively a bigger difference. यहाँ पे nearly more than 2% का difference आ रहा है. And so that seems to be an issue, and we find out why this is an issue. At the same time, if you look at the gold standard, HDFC का loan growth और total income या interest income growth जो है, that is actually more than the loan growth. So that is something that that is always great. And Kotak Mahindra Bank में, yes, there is a bigger difference, but then Kotak Mahindra is also growing at a much faster pace than most banks currently in India. By the way, this is the last 10 years data. So so there is a gap between the loan growth the interest income growth and the net profit growth, and we'll get to the point why this matters. Another point that is moving sort of against, that has been a problem with federal bank, is that the other income as a percentage of total income has been quite low. If we look in 2011, this number is still, I think, out of these 8 banks, out of these 7 banks, it was still the fourth highest, 11.31, highest 18.6, second year ho gaya, third year ho gaya, and fourth. So out of 7, it was still higher up relatively. But if we look at the same stat in 2020, it has moved down. And even in comparison to the growth, just a South Indian Bank ka jo other income as a percentage of total income has grown from 7.45 to 12, so that's more than 50%. CSB Bank has grown nearly 50%. City Union has grown. Karur Vysya has grown massively, 60%. Kotak Mahindra has kind of reduced. Kotak Mahindra has reduced a little bit, and HDFC also a little bit. But then again, like we said, 2020 numbers can be taken with a bit of a pinch of salt because of the COVID-19 provision. तो कई बैंक्स ने ज्यादा प्रोविजनिंग की, देयरफॉर उनके नेट प्रॉफिट ज्यादा डिप्रेस दिख रहे हैं. कई बैंक्स ने उतनी प्रोविजनिंग नहीं की, देयरफॉर देयर नंबर्स माइट बी स्लाइटली डिफरेंट. बट पॉइंट ये है कि अदर इनकम एज अ परसेंटेज ऑफ टोटल इनकम इज लो. नाउ व्हाई इज दिस इम्पोर्टेंट? ऐसा माना जाता है कि अदर देन द नेट इंटरेस्ट इनकम, जो लोन दिए और लोन से जो इंटरेस्ट आया, उस इनकम को छोड़ के बैंक्स रिलाई ऑन अदर इनकम अ लॉट, and other income happens to grow at a faster rate, मतलब ज्यादा तेजी से बढ़ता है compared to the net interest income growth, right? So that is one thing that a lot of analysts, a lot of banking analysts and banking investors like to look at to see how the bank is doing and to see in what direction it is progressing. And at least in Federal Bank's case, the movement is not very great. So I guess if we sum up these points, what we're saying here is कि लोन बुक जहां पिछले 10 साल में 16% पे ग्रो की है, नेट इंटरेस्ट इनकम ग्रो किया है 14% पे, एंड नेट प्रॉफिट फॉर फेडरल बैंक has increased by 11.33%. So there is a huge gap between loan growth and net profit growth. And that is a problem. Why is it a problem? Because it is going to impact, something like ROA. And ROA is obviously one of the key metrics that you use to, decide on the earning quality of a bank. So ROA is simply net profit divided by total average assets. Now, as we have seen, loan book तेजी से बढ़ रहा है 16%, right? तेजी नहीं कहूँगा, but relatively better. So that is growing, which means denominator is growing at a faster rate than the numerator, which is net profit. So naturally, the ROA numbers are going to be impacted. And as we can see, अगर हम फेडरल के केस में देखेंगे तो 1.23 था, 1.39. Before 2016, the numbers were decent. They weren't exceptional, but they weren't bad either. But 2016 के बाद, और जैसा हमने बात की 2016, 18, 20 में देखें क्या क्या इवेंट्स हुए. But since then, the number has been sub 1%. And ऐसा बोला जाता है बैंकिंग में कि 1% plus is something that you need to be for investors to consider a bank to be a quality bank. If we look at City Union at the same time, although it's one of the regional mid-sized banks, the ROA has been 1.5 roughly on average, except 2020, which again we talked about. COVID की वजह से provisioning ज़्यादा की है तो net profit has dropped. Return on assets for HDFC are even better, and Kotak are slightly less than HDFC but better than the other two. So that is why the higher the ROA, it also means that the higher the ROE, right? And the simple thing leading to all of this, जो हमने अभी समझा कि there is a difference, net profit उतना तेजी से नहीं grow हो रहा है. Because of that, ROA is not at adequate levels, and because of that, ROE is not at adequate levels. Now the issue is, if you look at the black line, which is the Federal Bank ROE numbers, they have been closer to say 13-14% pre-2016. But since then, it has been around 10%. HDFC 2019 numbers मैंने again इसीलिए हैं because 2020 I didn't want to take that. So that's why 2009. But HDFC 16.5%, City Union 15% ROE, Kotak Mahindra not so great but has other factors which are great. Federal Bank 9.77 and South Indian Bank. I mean, something we would not be interested in looking at. But so the question arises, why as an investor आप क्यों इन्वेस्ट करेंगे ऐसे कंपनी में या बैंक में या कैसे भी टाइप का बिजनेस हो जिसमें आरओई इज 10%, right? And that's exactly the question that investors have thought about. And obviously the answer is no. When you have other opportunities available, then why would you invest at a 10% business? Because ऐसा माना जाता है कि ROE is a proxy for the efficiency of the business. So the higher the ROE, the better. In fact, अगर आपने investing पे screening या जो भी है stock analysis you've learned, which I'm sure you have, but I hope you have. So you must have found that generally people consider कि 15% से ज़्यादा अगर ROE होगी तो ही हम उन्हें उन stocks को अपनी screening list में भी लाएंगे. And that is the reason, because it's a proxy for the return you would have earned if you were the owner of the company. मतलब equity मतलब आपका पैसा आपने मान लो 100 rupees लगाया और उस पे फेडरल बैंक आपको 10% दे रहा है, right? But a Kotak Mahindra or a City Union or an HDFC or many other banks that we have not considered in this analysis are giving you more. So why would investors want to be invested in something like a federal bank? Now, obviously, the price also is another variable. अगर price बहुत ही ज़्यादा cheap हुआ, where the upside is more, then it might make sense. But by and large, in the long run, ROE is a good proxy for the kind of returns that you're looking to earn, right? And that is why price to book value, which is the best valuation metric for a bank, right? That metric has been depressed. If you look at it, the black line again, Federal Bank, has been sub 2% for the most part of its last 9 years. South Indian Bank, as we saw, because ROE was low, ROA was lower, it has been poor. Whereas Kotak Mahindra has been trading at 6 times. इसका मतलब है कि investors are willing to pay for Kotak Mahindra a lot more than say City Union Fed, and the reasons are obvious. ऐसा नहीं है कि ये बहुत ही unreasonable result है. But those are the reasons, because Kotak Mahindra and HDFC are relatively more, they have better asset quality, they are larger banks with more competitive advantages, higher ROA numbers, so on all the metrics, the gold standard that they are setting, it's much better. And therefore, investors are willing to say value these banks at say 4 times book value or 6 times book value, whereas something like a federal bank has barely touched 2 times. So all of that, the initial idea that there is a difference between the loan growth and the net profit growth, that difference has actually showed up in how investors think about the bank, and therefore the valuations have been depressed, right? And because of that, by the way, if that was the yearly price by book value numbers, if you look at even the daily ones, you'll see that 2 se upar almost never, maybe 1 year it has gone, and that too we'll talk about why it went up, because profit nearly tripled within from 2016 to 2017-18ish, and that was why it increased. So इस period की भी हम बात करेंगे detail में. But those are the reasons that investors have not been comfortable valuing a federal bank at say higher valuations, right? And again, because of that, because of these numbers, because of these reasonings, if we look at the stock price return, a Kotak Mahindra has given 940% in the last 9 years, HDFC 665, City Unions 555, Federal only 135, 134, 135%, right? Whereas the Karur Vysya has been worse, PNB has worse, SBI has been terrible over the last 9 years, right? So there is a reason why investors are thinking that a bank is better compared to another bank, and Federal Bank, on a lot of these counts at least, has failed to sort of live up to the investor expectations, where you as an investor would be excited to, or would be willing to put your